There comes a time in every fighting game player's journey where they pick a controller. One of the longest running questions when it comes to playing fighting games is, what controller should I use? Arcade stick or pad? Throughout the years, this debate has had many arguments for and against. That was until a new controller entered the ring and flipped the decade-old argument on its head. This controller has the convenience of a regular pad with all of the benefits of an arcade stick and more. And all they had to do was remove the lever? That's right, no levers here, ladies and gentlemen, all buttons. But how does this work? Why are these controllers championed as the best of the best? Well, thanks to the people over at QRD Game who sent me over their Maestro S3 wireless leverless controller, I'm going to answer all of these questions and more in this review. So, without further ado, let's get started. Before we jump into the review proper, I think a bit of a history lesson is in order. So, in the beginning, we had arcade cabinets with sticks and buttons. With the release of Street Fighter II in 1991, the fighting game genre, as we know it, was born. Over the next 9 years, there was a golden age of arcade fighting games with series like Tekken, The King of Fighters, Mortal Kombat, Marvel vs. Capcom, and, of course, Street Fighter being some of the most popular. The players of this era mostly played in arcades, thus got used to using the classic lever and 6-button control scheme. It didn't help that the ports of fighting games at this time were less than accurate and, let's be honest, just inferior to their arcade counterparts. So, regular old controllers weren't popular for fighting games. Then, in the early 2000s, the popularity of fighting games fell off a cliff. While Street Fighter and similar 2D fighters became dormant, series like Tekken, Soul Calibur, Dead or Alive, and Mortal Kombat had a resurgence on consoles, and what did the people play these games with? Controllers. Getting a quality arcade stick for these consoles wasn't easy, so most people just opted for the readily available controller. However, just as this new generation of controller players settled in, while the arcade faithful were still playing their Third Strikes and Marvel vs. Capcom 2s, a game would release that would revitalize the 2D fighting game and breathe new life into the genre like never seen before, the ramifications of which we still feel today. Rising from its grave, Street Fighter came back with a vengeance, and Street Fighter IV hit the streets. Street Fighter IV was the start of what I would call the modern fighting game community, and in this community, we've got two types of players: arcade stick and controller. With the resurgence of fighting games, we saw an increase in demand for arcade sticks, and companies like Mad Catz, Hori, Mayflash, and Quanba delivered affordable quality arcade sticks that might have been more expensive than pad, but definitely offered the authentic experience. And thus began the years-long debate between the two. Lurking from the shadows, a new alternative arose: the leverless controller. Unlike the other two options, the leverless controller provides a degree of accuracy the other two could only dream of. This is thanks to the movement being tied to buttons opposed to sticks or D-pads. Despite this, it saw very little adoption as players were just used to their preferred controller. Plus, thanks to the low demand, very few people were manufacturing these super niche controllers. Although the people who did use them swore by it. As the years went on, I'd say you saw anime fighting game players gravitate towards leverless as the high accuracy of the controller made advanced techniques more consistent and inputs cleaner in general. There was one problem though. These early leverless controllers didn't account for what would happen if two movement buttons were held at the same time. For example, let's say you held left and right while blocking a jump in. Well, it would block in both directions, making it impossible to get crossed up. Obviously, this is unfair and led to these controllers getting a bit of a stigma, even being called cheat boxes by some. Thankfully, as the leverless controller got more popular and developers caught on, this issue was resolved by the implementation of simultaneous opposing cardinal directions, or SOCD. Now, when you hold left or right on a modern leverless controller, you'll get neutral, eliminating the unfair advantage. With that resolved, and as time went on, more and more people started seeing the benefit of leverless. Pro players from Street Fighter to Tekken to Guilty Gear started switching to leverless as their preferred controller. Nowadays, I would say it's the second most popular controller behind the pad, completely eclipsing the arcade stick. With this wider adoption came high demand for more quality leverless controllers, and that's where the Maestro S3 comes into play. The Maestro S3 wireless leverless controller is a controller by the people over at QRD Game. They reached out to me for this review and provided me with the controller free of charge. The Maestro S3 is natively compatible with the PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch, iOS, Android, and PC. For consoles like the PlayStation 5, you're out of luck. You need to get an adapter, although if the game does support PlayStation 4 controllers on PS5, it should be fine. Also, the controller has a turbo function, 3 SOCD modes, multiple latency options, and a 3.5mm headphone jack. So then, what's in the box? Well, you get one controller, one USB-C cable, a detachable phone clip, and some colored keycaps for customization. One of the biggest selling points of this controller is that it is not only leverless, but it's also wireless. However, you get the best of both worlds with the Maestro S3, because if you plug the controller into the console, the USB connection will take priority over Bluetooth, so you'll never have to worry about dropping connection in a tournament. One of the more practical benefits leverless has over arcade sticks is the portability, and the Maestro is no slouch. It's extremely lightweight and compact. Traveling with this thing is no hassle, which I really appreciate, because if there's one thing I hate about offline tournaments, it's lugging around this behemoth all day. I mean, just look at the size comparison. It's night and day. The Maestro comes fully kitted with RGB lights. Usually, I'm not a fan of RGB. Personally, I just find the rainbow colors to be garish and distracting. If given the option, I'll turn it off, but I actually grew to like the RGB on the Maestro. It's not super intrusive or obnoxious. It looks quite nice. I do have one problem with the box though. If you look here, it says it's compatible with the Xbox 360, and so does the user manual. Unfortunately, this is not the case. Like the PlayStation 5, you need an adapter, which was super disappointing because it was one of the things I was really looking forward to, since none of my arcade sticks work with the Xbox 360. With everything physical out of the way, let's cut the talk and put this Maestro to the test. I started my testing with the PlayStation 4. Connecting the Maestro was easy. Plug it into the console, press the Q button, and you're off to the races. The first game I tested was Guilty Gear Xrd Rev 2. I went right into Kai's combo trials, and I was surprised with how easily I adapted to leverless. I've used leverless in the past, but I've always been an arcade stick player, but after a couple of minutes I was flying through the trials like I was playing on my arcade stick. My inputs were also super clean. Doing double quarter circles, instant air dashes, and instant air moves was so easy, it was almost funny. I then moved on to Tekken and felt right at home. The only real problem I ran into was getting comfortable with the controller. I like to play with the controller in my lap, and due to its size, I found I had to adjust myself more than usual. Also, if you have big hands, you might have a hard time using this controller. After Tekken, I was satisfied with the PlayStation performance and switched over to the Switch. On the Switch, I started with some Capcom Fighting Collection. Street Fighter 2 played great, and when I switched to Dark Stalkers, I made another shocking discovery. Raging Demon inputs feel really good to do on this controller. I've always hated doing these on stick, but here on leverless, it just felt so natural. After finishing up my Dark Stalking, I went to test my skills with some good old SNK games, so I loaded up the Neo Geo Pocket Collection, and my controller wouldn't work. In the home menu, everything was fine, but the game didn't want to cooperate. It wasn't even recognizing my regular buttons This was fixed by disconnecting and then reconnecting the controller, and it worked fine after that, and I never had another issue, but I still found that really strange. Anyway, I played some Pocket KOF. Rambo Supers are pretty fun to do on Leverless because you piano all the buttons. I even got a couple rounds of golf in. I'm not very good at golf. Aside from the bizarre connection bug, the Maestro worked pretty well on Switch. It's actually pretty impressive it works out of the box for both PlayStation 4 and Switch without the use of some converter. Although the ultimate and final test is up next on PC. These days, I play all of my fighting games on PC. It's just convenient. Plus, I don't have to pay to use the internet I already pay for. When connecting the controller via Bluetooth, it acts as a PlayStation 4 controller. This is a bit of a problem because some games, especially older ones, don't work well with PlayStation controllers. That's where X input comes in. By holding the Option and Share button for 3 seconds, the input mode will change and the controller will act like an Xbox controller, which is way more compatible with PC. One problem though, it's only available in USB mode, which is a bummer. So from here on out, I used the controller exclusively as a USB controller. After I got everything working, I started testing with the best fighting game on the market right now, Melty Blood type Lumina. It worked like a charm without issue. After that, I picked up some Guilty Gear XX Accent Core plus R, and then some Grand Blue Fantasy vs. Rising, and this is where it started to feel off. Like, my inputs were sluggish. So I started messing with the latency settings, and after finding the right settings for each game, everything went back to normal. Switching between these modes is a real hassle. Each is a different button combination you have to hold, and it's just inconvenient. Sometimes it wouldn't even work the first time, and I'd have to try multiple times in a row before it would switch to the latency mode I wanted it to. This is also how they handle switching from D-pad to left stick and right stick movement. There's no easy way to tell what mode the controller is on, so I think if they had a physical switch on the controller instead of button combos, it would be a lot more convenient and improve the overall experience. Other than that, it worked as expected on PC. Having the switch latency is a hassle compared to other controllers, and for any future revisions, it would be nice to see a wireless X input mode. With all of my testing complete, what is the final verdict on the Maestro S3 wireless leverless controller? It's a very solid controller. Out of the box, you have a large amount of compatibility with multiple systems. It's extremely portable and works as you'd expect any leverless controller would, with all of the bonuses that come with that, plus the added bonus of being both a wired and wireless controller at the same time. On the other hand, having to tinker with the latency modes is something that isn't for everyone. No wireless X input mode, and the size of the controller, bit of a double-edged sword. I could easily see someone with bigger hands, or just a bigger person in general, having a hard time getting comfortable with this tiny controller. And of course, my biggest disappointment is the lack of Xbox 360 compatibility. I was really looking forward to that. All in all, the Maestro S3 is a leverless controller that is competitive with the market, but certainly has room for improvement. If you'd like to pick up one yourself, I have 2 links in the description, and full disclosure, neither of which are affiliate links. Anyways, like always, thanks for watching, and bye for now.